How's everyone? All right, sorry guys.
I just know my mom actually she refused to wear glasses and my sister can. They were
How was the quiz, everyone? Okay, hey, I'm gonna come with me. Stop talking. I know. Shalom. Yeah, we did it. Good job, everyone. So did all of you take the quiz? Who didn't take the quiz?
Okay.
I'm gonna close it tomorrow. So I don't know. No, sorry. So I have told you before that I'm not trying to trick you. I have to confess that there was one question on there that was tricky, and I apologize about said question. But we literally talked about it in class. If some of you haven't taken it yet, so I can't, we'll do this bit on Wednesday. But the two of you who emailed me, I super respect the attempt. Always feel free, but I might say sorry. Anywho, I'm not curving a quiz.
Not the quiz.
Okay. The test, there's a 7-point curve. Your grade book, I don't even know how to load in the stuff for the grade book, if I'm being honest. I'm still figuring that out. So the tests are worth, each test is worth 25 or a little less, about 20% of your average. So it's like, so a third of your test, multiply whatever your test score was, and that's how many points towards the overall 100 for the A, B, C, or D. But again, your final replaces your lowest test grade. So if you hate it, it'll be fine. You'll survive. But unfortunately, you do in fact have to study for this class. I know, it's terrible. All right. So this week we are going to do Matthew 5 through 7. We might get to chapter 8 and 9. Although considering how slow we're going to move, I doubt it. But we'll do our best. And then you'll have your quiz on Friday over the text. So the quiz will be out based on the text and whatever we talk about in class. So that's kind of all the stuff that's fair game. There won't be any questions from Powell. Let's do the Shema and we'll get rolling. Shema Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael.
Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha.
Bechol levacha.
Bechol levacha.
Uvechol nafshecha.
Ubechol nafshecha.
Uvechol mechodeha.
Ubechol mechodeha.
Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Amen.
Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Amen.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Amen. You can be seated. So last week we started the Beatitudes. Goodbye, friends. We started the Beatitudes. We left Jesus on a mountainside. Remember, he's the whole following the course of Israel. He begins his sermon with the Beatitudes, which are a poem. I didn't mention this last time because I wanted to just kind of discuss and get your take on what these things meant. We hit some of the big concepts. Ignore that line. That doesn't make sense. But I want to start with talking about exile. And do y'all remember, do you guys remember the whole idea of Israel being thrown out of the land in the timeline? The Assyrians threw the Israelites out and the Babylonians threw the Judahites out, and they were in exile from the land. And that was a big thing of when is the exile going to end? They came back and rebuilt the temple and rebuilt all that stuff. But it was sort of a downer because the temple was not nearly as cool as it was before, and the Jerusalem was in ruins. Yeah, they built some walls around it, but they were a province of Persia. They weren't actually like on their own. And there were all these promises in the Old Testament of this is what return from exile is going to look like. And when they were looking around, they were like, is this it? Are we actually back or not? I don't know. And so a big thing for the Jews of Jesus's day was, when is the exile going to end? When is God going to throw out the Romans? When is all of these promises that are in the prophets going to come true? And so I want to start today by talking about what the people who are hearing Jesus teach the Sermon on the Mount might have been thinking when someone starts saying things like Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount. So we start here, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So it's a poem, and I'm going to point out a couple of things, but like notice we have righteousness and kingdom of heaven starting and finishing. So it's poetically arranged. And then in Greek, all of these words, so mourn, meek, spirit, start with the word P. Pneumia, you don't care about the Greek. Anyway, it's just, there's some like, it's very clearly poetic. So it's like, that's what he's starting with. And this is echoing a few concepts in here are echoing back to one of the most famous passages that's used in Luke's gospel, and it's used later in Matthew's gospel, Isaiah chapter 61. So the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Blessed are the poor in spirit. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim freedom for captives, release from darkness the prisoners, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, provide those who grieve in Zion, bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of the spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. And it goes on to talk about how God's going to call Israel back from exile and restore their fortunes. So to a group of people who are steeped in these scriptures, and not only are they steeped in these scriptures, they desperately hope for these to come true. That they're waiting for this to happen. You have people who are anticipating this to happen. If you've got a guy who starts firing off things like, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, and blessed are the pure in heart, like starts kind of doing this, it's not like a one-to-one connection type thing, but if there's a group of people, they might be thinking, who does this guy think he is? Is he the one who the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on? Who is he saying he is? So these are the things that I think the people of Jesus's day, he had these crowds following him in large part because they were wanting to know if it was time, if this is what's happening. And I think Jesus deliberately does things to make people do that throughout the various gospels. And so I start with this just to show you how this is not at all like a one-to-one. Look, like whenever the Psalm 104 to the thing, it's just, there's an echo. There's like these same ideas of mourning and comfort, of good news to the poor, that Jesus taps into this tradition that is so much in his audience's mind. And he's drawing this up, and it makes people think and gets people excited about, I wonder if the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on this guy, if he thinks he's this guy. That's the question that people may have been asking in Jesus's day. Just to show you that, yeah, I already kind of pointed those things out. Anywho, all right. And that will be nice whenever you're looking back through the slideshow and saying, what the heck was he talking about there? So there it is. A big thing, and actually, let me just highlight this last line right here. A big part about the Messiah, the one to come, is the liberation of the people. So they want freedom from, in Isaiah's day, it would have been the Babylonians, or it would have been the Assyrians. But here in this day, they'd say the Romans, like, we want to be liberated. We want to be free. We want to have self-determination. And Jesus comes in and says, I am the liberator, but it's not exactly what you think. It's not the kill the Romans that you zealots were banking on. I've come to liberate you from something deeper, from the power of sin, death, and hell, from Satan and all of his forces and all that stuff, which we'll get into. But you're going to see how Jesus starts with kind of this echo of this Isaiah concept, and this stuff might be floating around in people's minds. And then as he starts to teach the Sermon on the Mount, you're going to get to stuff like love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And so to the people who are waiting for the day of vengeance of God and for the liberation and the killing of the Romans, how does that square with loving our enemies and praying for those who persecute us? What is Jesus? What kind of Messiah is Jesus? What's he coming in as? Is a question that people would have been asking. Questions on that rant? Great. Let's get into it. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, if anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So, salt and saltiness and a light on the hill. What's he saying? With salt and saltiness. What is salt used for? Preservation. What else is salt used for? Taste. What else is salt used for?
Definitely another thing.
Okay, so it could kind of be, it stings really bad, which might be so any of you guys come from up north? Anyone up north where you got a frozen road? What do you put on it? Salt. Do you put good salt on there or bad salt? Bad salt. You're not going to put the stuff you put on the table on the road. You're going to put the junk stuff on there because it's more useful to use the road salt is a lower grade salt than the table salt that you have. So you are the salt of the earth. If salt loses its saltiness, if it's junk salt, it can't be made salt again. It's not good for anything. Just throw it out and trample it underfoot. Now, these are a desert people, so they're not going to be thinking about the frozen thing. It really doesn't freeze too much up there in Israel. It will in some parts, in the near the mountains and stuff like that. But again, the cool thing about parables is that they work on multiple levels and they teach on multiple levels. So I don't know about you guys, but this is something that's great, is that when you have a good teacher, they can understand a subject and they can explain it in a complicated way, but they can explain it, right? They can explain it to people who have the ability to work hard and understand it. A great teacher can explain a complicated subject to a child. Because to explain a complicated subject to a child, you have to understand it so well that you can distill its essence and explain it in a very simple way. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't salt, wasn't it used back
Yeah, yeah, you
Is
can.
that what you could be alluding to, like?
The throwing it out and trampling on it could be a little bit like salting the earth would be like things won't grow when you put salt on it. I don't think he's talking about salting the fields where you like, burn your enemy's crops and salt it so that they can't grow stuff anymore. I think he's more talking about the preservative and the taste. But that is a really good insight. That was how salt was used back then. But to the point of the teacher aspect is that a lot of folks, if you're into the Bible and you're from the West, you'll tend to camp out in Paul's letters a lot of the times because they really make sense to us. They explain things in abstract. They use linear reasoning, which is like how we like to write and think. They don't really give themselves to like the picture thinking and things like that. Jesus's teachings are much more Eastern in style. They're much more parable focused. It's a story that is you're teaching through the story. The character, you have to do more thinking. It's not as abstract. It's concrete thinking. And it can almost seem like, oh, that's how you teach children. But no, it's actually working. All of these things are working on multiple levels, and you just have to spend more time sitting with it. He doesn't exactly tell you what he means exactly. It's the audience's job to sit there and think about it and try to apply it and let it kind of work around and percolate in your head. A big thing about rabbinical teaching, which Jesus was a rabbi, and so he taught in this style, is that they're not super concerned with like making it perfectly understandable to you all. Like if I were not to be clear in my teaching and I gave you a test question, I feel a little bit guilty if like y'all get it wrong, because I'm like, I wasn't super clear about that. So like, I don't know, like blah, blah. In this context, you're the student. It's your job to figure out what the teacher's trying to tell you. You show your effort by trying to figure it out. You sit there and wrestle with it and discuss it and kind of let it percolate in your mind. And that it is really, it's just a different style of teaching that we who go through the school system where it's like, let me gear you up to take a test so that you can show that you have passed the test, so you can show the employer that you have the degree, so that you can get the job, so that you can continue to be an automatic robot producing things for money. That's kind of our system. And that system is really good at producing wealth. It's not that great at producing profound thought or goodness. And this is kind of a different set of priorities of God wanting to sit and think with the Sermon on the Mount. I've read this hundreds of times, and I see something different you get more insights. You're like, oh, okay, does that apply here? We're gonna draw out some of them, but just know that like this is, you're supposed to sit there and be like, well, what is salt for? And you kind of talk about what works. And there's some things that like don't work and some things that do, but sort of part of the teaching style, if that makes sense. So salt loses its saltiness. How can it be made salty again? You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Yes, ma'am.
So sorry, going back to the
You
salt.
could, yeah.
This is more just like a question of like culturally back then.
Yeah.
Was salt considered like pure in any way? Like did it have any kind of like purity going
So
on?
not as much purity, but it's incredibly important.
Yeah.
So and I was the thing about salt is that one, it was expensive.
Yeah.
It was one of Israel's main exports to the world. So have y'all ever heard of the Dead Sea? Because the Dead Sea is all filled with salt. There's salt mines all around. So Israel would export salt to the rest of the Roman world. And that's how they made a lot of money. That was one of the ways that they had a lot of stuff. You needed salt to preserve meat. You needed salt to preserve all sorts of food. They didn't have refrigerators just chilling or freezers. So you had to salt things in order to make the food last. And so salt was incredibly important as a preservative. And it was really nice to make it taste. And there's a couple of really cool ways that we can apply that to the people of God, because Jesus is describing how he wants his kingdom to look, how he wants his people to behave. So this is one of those things, is that his people preserve the world in a certain way. So we will get into this later, but Jesus tells a lot of parables about some people headed for destruction and some people headed for life. And if you take this parable, the preservation, the reason why God just doesn't destroy the wicked and actually set all things to rights right now is because he's trying to let his salt work through it all. And we are preserving the world so that more can be gathered in. That's one level of what's going on here. Another level that I really love with salt is kind of the disposition of his people. Have y'all ever been in a conversational space? So not a lecture. In a lecture, I'm supposed to talk more than y'all. But if we're in a conversation space and one person is just like dominating the conversation, isn't that super annoying? Right? Okay, so if you're in a discussion or like a group discussion or whatnot, the best kind of discussion is where everyone is everyone's being drawn from, right? So the salty person in a group little Bible discussion is going to be really good at drawing others into the conversation, and everyone will benefit from it. The flavor of the conversation will be much better. But if you have too much of the salt, if you have too much of one person, it gets annoying and bad. Salt doesn't, if you taste the salt, that's not good. The salt is supposed to accentuate the flavor of everything else. You taste more of whatever food you're eating. You don't actually taste the salt. So subtlety is a good thing for Christians. That's just a little deal there. But this saltiness is connected with the light on the hill. Okay, towns. Good morning. All right. Where were we? Okay. So we are a light on the hill. What happens when an enemy army comes in to invade? Where do people in the ancient world go?
Top of the hills.
What's on the top of a hill? Towns. Good job. Absolutely. So most of the cities in the ancient world are built on hills. They are built on hills for, yes, ma'am.
Does Israel have a lot of hills?
It does. Lots and lots of hills. So it is on what's called the Rift Valley. So it's a very geologically active zone. So you have a lot of plates shifting together, which makes the terrain incredibly hilly. So you've got a lot of areas with lots of hills.
Like a desert or like a
Both.
Okay.
Literally, what's crazy about Israel is that if you take like the geology of Texas and slam it into the size of New Jersey, that's what Israel's like geological zones are. You can drive an hour and totally change your climate zone. It's crazy. Come with me next May and I'll show you. I just have to keep shamelessly plugging. Okay, so this city on a hill thing, the idea is that the hill, you can't hide a city. You can't hide a city. And the city was the place of refuge if an enemy army came in. The city is where there would be, like, if you were starving, you could go to the city gate and ask for hospitality. The city is a place where people are supposed to go to seek shelter, safety, all of those things. And so the city on a hill concept is the people of God are supposed to be a shining city on the hill, a beacon to the rest of the world around them that you can find help here. You can find people who care here. You can find hospitality here. You can find protection here. And you can't, this is another thing about Christianity that in our modern world is the under a bowl thing. That is a big one that is a temptation right now. Because have y'all ever heard the whole separation of church and state thing before? Okay, yeah, most of y'all are familiar with that concept. So the American Constitution was written basically right after the 100 Years' War in Europe. And basically Europe tried to kill each other over differences in theology and whatnot for like 100 years. And all the framers of the Constitution, following some Enlightenment thinkers, were like, you know what? What if we didn't kill each other because we think that the communion is the real body and blood of Christ versus just a symbol? I don't know. What if we just kind of agreed to disagree and sort of, you guys do your thing, we'll do our thing. Pretty reasonable idea, right? Like let's not kill each other over religious differences. That's kind of the whole basis to the Constitution, is like, we have all this religious war, we're going to try to not do that here as best we can, which is, I think, a really cool thought. There's a problem with it, though, is that religion is always talking about competing concepts of the good. And so ultimately, we're going to end up in like how do you resolve disputes and things like that? There are some things that what the American like democratic order tries to do is get you to sort of privatize the religious stuff and say, we're just going to push that into the private zone. And we're all going to agree that in the public zone, we're just going to like leave religious questions out of it and just deal with sort of secular type questions. Well, the issue with that from a Christian's perspective is that there is no divide between the public and the private. You're either an entire Christian or you're not a Christian. Now, does that mean that you have to force your views on other people? No, you're not really responsible for them. You're responsible for yourself, your family, all that stuff. And I think that Christianity can survive just fine in American like democratic order, but there is a tension there. Everything in our societal institutions wants you to divide yourself into zones of sacred and secular. On Sunday, you're a Christian, but on Monday through Friday, you are a servant of the capitalist order in order to produce wealth for yourself and your country. And so we're gonna just not talk about religion here in these spaces, and we'll save religion for like Sundays and Wednesdays maybe. And you can have that, and you can think whatever you want in your religious space, but don't bring that into the workplace. A light on the hill can't be put under a lamp. You can't do that. And now I want to remind you that, like, again, that doesn't mean we have to come into secular spaces and be a jerk. Actually, please don't do that. That's not being a light on the hill. But we can't hide who we are. If at our core we are sinners saved by grace and Jesus is our master, then what he says about the world is what we have to go with. And we're going to have to find creative ways to respond to those pressures that we face here in this country. And the Sermon on the Mount is great at finding creative ways to deal with an oppressive system or a system that's kind of forcing you out of it, like going an extra mile and whatnot. And we'll get into that probably on Wednesday. Does that make sense? All right. Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. What does it mean by law and prophets? Old Testament, thank you. So you see law and prophets, that's a shorthand for the Old Testament. Don't you think I came to abolish the Old Testament? I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter or the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. And who sets aside least is, yeah, all that. We already read it. So, and then he says, you got to surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And he's going to explain how to do that coming up. I said it pretty loud. I don't know what your problem is here. Okay, abolish and fulfill. What does that mean? What's that? Yeah, get rid of. Have y'all ever heard people talk about what Jesus means here? As it turns out, people disagree about what he means here. I don't know if you knew that, but some people actually disagree about what the Bible says about a few things. Just so you know. I know, it's wild. So one of the ways that you can guess is like the more that's been written about a particular passage, the less clear it probably is, or the more offensive it is to a given culture. Because people like to write about and disagree about things that are controversial. So abolish and fulfill I'm going to give you, okay, whatever abolish means, it has to mean not do away with entirely, right? He's not come to abolish the law. So he's not just saying the Old Testament doesn't matter. I think we can be pretty clear in saying abolish means that. So I've not come to abolish. I've not come to do away with it all. I've come to fulfill it. So in some sense, the Old Testament is pointing to Jesus. And then one of the things, we have followed Jesus's track through Israel's story, and he's up on the mountain where Israel received the law. Israel received the Torah on Mount Sinai. Jesus is on the mountain, and he's about to start teaching Torah. So and this is, I will tell you what I think about this, and some people disagree. I think he's trying to say, I've not come to teach it wrongly. I've come to teach it properly, to show you what it was trying to tell you the whole time. I don't think there's anything in Jesus' teaching that wasn't deduced from the Old Testament. He is constantly referring back to it. And there is not like love your neighbor, love your enemy, all that's in the Old Testament. Now, Jesus is drawing it out and clarifying it, but he's not changing it. It's all one story. You can hear me say that. It's all one story. He's not come in opposition to it. He's not come to say it's bad and grace is good. He has come to say, I've come to teach you how to think about this right. There is a rabbinical practice in Second Temple Judaism that actually kind of uses this abolish and fulfill language. And so this is the idea of, any of y'all know the 10 Commandments? One of them is don't steal. Okay? Do not steal. All right, so let me kick you a scenario here. So I'm working for this guy, the ACU dean. He's my boss, and he just doesn't pay me nearly enough. He's stealing from me. He's stealing my labor by not paying me enough. Okay, so the Bible says don't steal. So he's stealing from me. So in order for me to compensate for that, I'm going to just like take this computer and sell it on Craigslist, and that will compensate me for the money that he's stealing from me. That's my interpretation of the law. A rabbi would say, you've abolished Torah. You may not have even read it because you've interpreted it so wrongly that you've gone ahead and abolished it. No, you need to think about it rightly and say, okay, trust God, be in this spot. Like interpreting it wrongly is abolishing Torah. Interpreting it rightly is fulfilling Torah. And that is a big concept that I tend to think that that's what Jesus is trying to do here. And a big reason for that is the next sections of text. So I just want you to look at the headers real quick. Murder, adultery, divorce, oaths, eye for an eye, and love your enemies. All right. Now I know that you probably don't know the 10 Commandments off the top of your head. You should. Let's look at the 10 Commandments right quick. God spoke all of these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation to those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For 6 days the Lord made the heavens and earth, and the sea and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. All right. Murder, adultery, divorce, oaths, lying, eye for an eye, and love for enemies. That back half, you see how this, literally, the same order he is doing in his teaching. He is drawing your attention to the 10 words, which is like everything that every little Jewish boy and girl knew the 10 Commandments by heart. That was a big deal. They knew much more than that, but they definitely knew that. So Jesus is going to teach them how they were supposed to keep the law. And there's a lot of research into this, and you can take my word for it or you can Google it. I don't really care. But all of the weird commandments in the Old Testament, usually the way that people interpret like Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, all that stuff, is that you have basically case law that's sort of working out the 10 Commandments. So you have like prohibitions against, like, so do not murder. And you have a section of case law of, well, if someone accidentally kills someone, what do we do? Well, if someone deliberately kills someone, what do we do? Well, it's kind of like working out the implications of do not murder. That's kind of how those work together. So Jesus is coming in here, and he is clarifying a lot of the misunderstandings that the people of his day had, and teaching his disciples and all the people following him how they're supposed to interpret Torah. Okay, so let's dive into it, and then we've got a little bit of time. You have heard it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to a court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering a gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer. You may be thrown in prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. What is Jesus trying to teach here on murder?
Being angry with someone that's murder.
Okay. Does he say don't be angry? Yes, ma'am.
I would just say like he's telling you to reconcile with your grievances before it escalates to that.
Yeah, be reconciled. Did you have something, Sabrina? Never mind. Okay. Oh my gosh, your name's not. What's your name?
Me?
Samantha.
Yes.
I said Sabrina. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Be reconciled. So he actually anger, and this is a big thing. And like I've heard it taught, don't be angry all the time. It doesn't actually say that. You're gonna get angry. Anger is not sin, but anger is like sin is like an addictive drug that it's like anger is the gateway drug to all sorts of sins. Get a little sniff of anger and you just stop seeing straight. It's not good to dwell in your anger. And it leads to bitterness, it leads to lashing out, it leads to hatred, it leads to all these things. It is a very human emotion that you will feel. And so he's not saying that anger is sin, he's saying, be reconciled. Okay, what is harder? To just kind of ignore someone and walk away and not kill them? Or go up to them and be reconciled to the person who made you angry? Reconciliation is so stinking hard. Are you kidding me? Because half the time the other person isn't even sorry for what they did. But you got to be reconciled? I go to Israel and like lead tours to Israel. That's a thing. Yeah, I know, right? The Israel-Palestine conflict has been raging for over 100 years, really 2,000 years. But recently, the recent one is over 100 years. I had a student back when the skirmishes sort of broke out earlier last year, ask me, like, can you explain to me the Israel-Palestine conflict? And I, like, what's going on? And I very unironically started with, well, in 1948. And she just started laughing because it's like, I didn't want that context. Just explain to me what's going on right now. The fact is, is that what's going on with the Israelites or the state of Israel, the Palestinians, is like hundreds of years of grievances against each other, particularly bloodshed since 48. And it's kind of law, like people will make moral claims of, well, we were here first, or we were here first, or we have the right of nations, or we have this or that. But on the ground, a lot of it is, you killed my brother, you killed my son, you killed my mother, on both sides. There's a blood debt. How are you reconciled to a group of people who killed family members you love? And so what do you have? Generations of anger and hatred, generations of killing, generations of violence. You can look at the United States of America with what the white community has done to the black community over a long time, or any other communities of color. Cycles and generations of violence that come from that. And so what Jesus is doing here is he's going into that and saying, you know how you end the cycle that leads to murder? Reconciliation. Go make it right. That doesn't mean you forget about grievances or ignore justice. He's just talked about hungering and thirsting for justice and righteousness. But this is how you end the cycle. And the really sucky thing that we'll get to, that's really hard, is that he says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He says, for his people, we're going to take the punishment or the pain of not being vindicated. We're going to try to be reconciled. Even if the other side has something and they're doing something unfair, great. I'm going to try to end this cycle of violence. The church is going to approach the world in a different way. Because I promise you, logically speaking, you can always find a reason why you have a grievance that hasn't been settled and you have a reason to be angry and hold on to your anger. You have a legitimate reason. And he's saying, yeah, you do. But my kingdom is better. And what I've given you is better, so let it go. It's complicated. But in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, that's what Dr. King was preaching the whole time. The reconciliation and nonviolence. And he was criticized, like, it's so funny that, and this is, we'll get to this in Matthew 24, but Jesus talks about how there were decorations on the tombs of the prophets, and how he's like, you guys decorate the tombs of the prophets, but you would have killed them had they been here. And we kind of like venerate Dr. King now. He's safely dead, so he can't keep talking to us. When he died, he had an approval rating lower than the Soviet Union premier, Mr. Khrushchev. So prophets are a lot less controversial when they're dead. Because again, they can't call you out anymore. All right, so he moves from murder to adultery. You have heard that it is said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. Better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. What does that mean?
I know a lot of people who don't like that part right there.
Why is that?
Because it's too difficult for a lot of people to like listen to it because they weren't taught that way
Yeah.
growing up. So they're like, oh, that's women's fault for being such and such way, etc.
Well, it's rather interesting that Jesus does not, in fact, say that the lady needs to be dressed appropriately, and that, well, she was asking for it because she was wearing that crazy, she exposed her ankles. So therefore, what are you supposed to do, guy? He actually puts the burden on the man to cut off his eye and his right hand. Can anyone think why he might think eye and right hand?
Eye for looking,
Yeah, right hand.
for touching.
There you go. All right. So He says, you want to kill lust? Go to its source. Stop feeding your brain. And again, he doesn't actually condemn like lust. He doesn't condemn the whole attraction. That's natural. You can't get away from being attracted to someone. That is like part of the thing. He talks about the action that you follow up that with. And he says, go to the source and kill it. Quit masturbating, basically, is what he's saying. You're feeding yourself. You're feeding your brain. Cut it off at the source. This is one of the things that's crazy, is that the Christian sexual ethic is very difficult. Very difficult in every age. Impossible in no ages. Incredibly countercultural in every age. This was an age where more than half of the population were slaves. And if you had slaves, for lots of situations, the female slaves were sexual access to the males. Terrible. Considered commonplace in this day. Christianity was mocked as a religion of women and slaves, in large part because women were actually treated with care and respect because of how sexually, what would they say, regressive they are. If you're in control of your sexuality, you can take it or leave it. You aren't controlled by your desires. You're not going to rape a female slave. How do you think the female slaves felt about the male Christians who they were safe around? Because their rabbi told them to cut their hands off rather than treat a woman poorly. It's really interesting, the Christian sexual ethic, there's a lot of, this guy named Tom Holland writes a book called Dominion, where he you don't really care about that, but basically like a big part of the conversion, a big part of the attractiveness of Christianity was the fact that they were restrained in their bodies. If you're going to have men and women who are single, who are friends together, you have to have control of your bodies. Otherwise, the women are always going to be manipulated and abused. Particularly in this culture, where a woman's testimony wasn't accessible in court, admissible in court. And frankly, we have a better court system now, and it's still like the hardest thing to prosecute is rape. One of the hardest things to prosecute. So Christians, control your bodies. But I want you to see the connection that it's not just like, oh yes, sex is ugly and dirty and you must be prudish or whatever. No, it's, you want to love your neighbor well? Stop trying to think about getting in their pants all the time. Being in control. You want to love your wife well or your husband well? Be in control of your body. Anywho. This is where it gets, we're good. I can just do quick 2 minutes on divorce, right? No one, not at all. Let's stop there. We'll open it up with the divorce next time. Thank you guys. Y'all have a good day.